good? Yeah, I can't hear it from up here, so. So good morning and welcome everybody. If you haven't gotten any refreshments, please help yourself so that I don't have to take them home. This is an official village board meeting, which I will now call to order. We don't have any business scheduled other than what's on the agenda. I do want to do some brief introductions, just so that those of you in the room who maybe haven't come to a meeting in a while or ever will know who you're looking at. Starting down at my right, your left, Ben Garfler, village trustee. Deb Watkins, village trustee and our deputy mayor. Morgan Wright, our deputy clerk. Ben Carver, village trustee, and Keith Hannon, village trustee. Hiding out somewhere is our village clerk, Tammy Morse, and in the back is Vicki Badalamenti, our village treasurer, and I am Gordon Hart, the village mayor. I do want to take a moment to recognize trustee and deputy mayor Deb Watkins. This will be her last and final State of the Village. Deb has spent most of the last decade on the village board. She has been our water, sewer, and DPW commissioner the entire time, and it's not an exaggeration to say that she almost is single-handedly responsible for the fact that we have a redundant supply of water that more than doubles our capacity from what we had previously, as well as a much-needed sewer plant upgrade, which was something that hadn't been done since the late 60s. So her initiative and drive to get those two projects completed within the last couple of years is something that the village will owe her a debt of gratitude for a long time to come. So thank you, guys. Talk a little more slowly. Taking a slightly different approach to the agenda this year. In previous years, we've kind of broken things up with a break in the middle. What we're going to do is kind of, I don't want to race through it, but we're going to kind of work through 2019 year in review, 2020 look forward as a combination with updates on various village departments. And then we'll move directly into some of the hot button projects and initiatives that we're looking to either continue or begin in 2020. And after that, we will take about a 10-minute break. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the clock. Try to take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back to what I hope will be kind of a town hall style open floor Q&A. As we work through the agenda on the various topics, if you have questions, please ask. I don't want to necessarily say that you have to wait till the end. If it's a relevant question to what we're talking about, it makes sense to ask it then while we're all listening. But the open Q&A, I really kind of have envisioned as anything goes. Don't ask me for a Super Bowl pick because that probably wouldn't be a good bet. But really kind of wide open as far as any questions you might have. Village specific is better, but I'm actually not opposed to broader questions if you think it's relevant for this board to address. So without further ado, we will start our 2019 year in review and look ahead with a review of the Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Revision Committee. In the spring of 2018, I commissioned the committee to begin looking at, because it was a hot button issue at the time, begin looking at our comprehensive plan, which was first adopted in 2008. That was the village's very first comprehensive plan. And New York State likes to suggest that municipalities review it, preferably every 5 years, but no less than 10. So 2018 being 10 years from the adoption date of the comp plan was a perfect time to begin a thorough review of that plan, which will then inform any changes that may or may not be needed to the zoning ordinance, because we need to have the comp plan updated before we can actually review the zoning. Jessica Giles, who was not the planning board chair at the time, who then became planning board chair, was our first chair of the CPZR, as we call it. When she became planning board chair, she, due to time commitments, stepped down as the chair of the CPZR, and I asked Ben Garfler to take over. We engaged the services of a professional planning company out of Syracuse by the name of EDR, and they have been doing a tremendous amount of work, sifting through every piece of the comp plan and doing the work necessary to make that well, it's been a relevant document, but a more relevant document for the 21st century. And I'll hand it over to Ben to talk about their work over the past year.
Yes, so,
Can you hear me?
yes, I'll hold this closely. Yeah, so the beginning of last year, as Gordon was saying, we continued to work with EDR, our consultant, and work through the previous comp plan. And as we've been going, we've been kind of looking what we have, what we've accomplished, where we want to go in the future, and keeping all that kind of documented for our future use in this process. We went through the previous vision statement of the previous comp plan, looked at that deeply, reviewed that, updated that, and then that has been out for public review for a while. I'll talk about that towards the end a little bit. We've also been working on a character area map, which is something that EDR has been pushing us for, which is just really us helping EDR understand the various neighborhoods around the community. I think if we all kind of give a moment to kind of think, you know, what are the different neighborhoods? There's kind of Wake Street feels like one kind of area, you know, Tamarack Larchmont feels like a different area. So we've kind of been identifying those areas for EDR. It's been helpful for them to think about the village, what constituent parts of the village exist, specifically, mostly from a housing perspective, but also from a commercial perspective. And then that will help them more deeply as we move into zoning later in the process as well. So we're kind of getting a sense of what are the different areas, what are the different looks and feels, what do we like, what do we want to keep, what might we want to adjust going forward. We've also looked through the existing plan goals, the action items in the existing plan to understand, you know, what have we already accomplished. And I've been very impressed with the amount that we have gotten done in 10 years. It's just, there was a lot of really good ideas there, and I think they've kind of, you know, spoken for themselves and we've gotten them accomplished. There's been a number of things that we haven't gotten done, so we've marked those and intend to continue those forward and bring them into the next plan. And there's been a number of things, you know, that just aren't quite relevant anymore. You know, as things change, that's why we look at the comp plan every 10 years. You know, everything you have an idea to do 10 years ago doesn't always make sense to do 10 years later. So we've been looking through those. And as a culmination of all that kind of work, we've held the initial public meeting here in November, very well attended, had a lot of really good feedback from that. People enjoyed that. We showed the draft vision statement. We talked about a longer talk about kind of the overarching arc of this project, where we started, where we're going, a timeline, and so forth. And we had plenty of time for public input as well. So we had boards in the back, people could leave sticky notes. We have a questionnaire as well, and I'll give a link to that later. That questionnaire continues to be open, so for people in the room who have not filled that out yet, please do. Like I said, we'll have a link further, some further slides. So looking forward, we are squarely in a period of kind of bringing all these goals and strategies together and kind of trying to create a draft of what are our goals as a community, how are we going to address those goals, and what are the really specific action items we'd like to see taken. This is, you know, in very early stages. The committee is working on this. Like I said, we're bringing in information from that November public meeting, from the questionnaire, from the current comprehensive plan that we reviewed, and we will be disseminating that back out in the next few months is the plan for a second public information meeting in the March-April timeframe, so keep an eye out for that. We'll hopefully have the same kind of outreach we did last time through the papers, postcards, emails, every sort of Facebook, every sort of option we have to try and allow people to know when that is and where that will be. We're also reviewing an initial draft of the kind of early parts of the comp plan. So the comp plan generally is broken down into kind of where we are, you know, what does the village look like from population, the economy side of things, school district, all the kind of components of the village. And that kind of detailed data-driven pieces is what EDR has been working on in parallel with all the committee work. We're starting to get early drafts of that. We're reviewing that. That's also going to be on review at that second public information meeting. Once we've gotten through all that, we'll continue to review and revise as we get the information, and eventually, as we keep moving forward, we'll present the final draft to this board, to the village board, for review and possible adoption. And that will include, a formal hearing with this board, environmental review to make sure we don't, put industry on the creek or something crazy like that. And then, assuming we adopt that in good time, we'll start moving into the land use side of things, that's zoning, site plan, subdivision, and so forth. Yeah, so please, continue to be involved. We meet every third Thursday of the month at the Village Hall at 6:30. I should say there's a number of committee members in the audience. Pick on people, could you please stand up so people can see who in the audience is on the CBCR committee. So thank you everyone. We've got Jack, Dave, Kathy, and Tom here. So if you want to chat with any of them afterwards, please do, and they can bring information and ideas into the committee. Please do fill out the survey if you haven't already done so, and that's a rather long link, but you can take a picture if you want. Otherwise, it is also linked on our page on the village website. You can go to the village website and look under the committees. There's a revision committee there. And please keep an eye out for our next public information meeting, again, March, April timeframe. And hope to see you there, and always reach out to me, myself as well.
And there are copies of the questionnaire.
Oh, thank you. And there's copies of the questionnaire in the back as well. If you want to pick up a hard copy, you can fill that out and return it back to the office. Take one for a friend, a neighbor, anyone who you think might be interested in giving input who might not be here today.
Any questions for Ben or any of us about comprehensive planning?
So again, just to clarify, the comprehensive plan is really taking the temperature of the villagers and what we view the village to be and our important needs. So if we want to make our voices heard as citizens, it's filling out that survey, as well as attending any feedback meetings, but really getting it. Did I emphasize filling out the survey?
Yes, please fill out the survey. And we are planning on having a second, so this current survey is very, very broad, really open to any of your thoughts, ideas, questions, concerns. There are some kind of suggestions of questions on there, but that's not, don't get too distracted by them. Please, whatever's on your mind, fill that out and bring it back in so we can incorporate that. We are planning on a second, more kind of pointed, in-depth survey to come out hopefully in line with the second public information meeting, so that'll be another chance. But all of these opportunities, please do, stop in. We've had members of the community join our Thursday meetings just to kind of see the process. If you come too many times, we draft you on the board. Jack can attest to that, so you were, Katie, I should say. But we do welcome any and all input. If you've got an idea that you want to see happen in the village, now is the time. The comprehensive plan is really a focus on what we want to see as a village, and then we get to distill that from an overarching, a strong, thriving Main Street. This could be a very broad topic, and then how do we drill down into what are the tactical actions against that? And what's valuable there is then we can take that information and go against grants, go out for other projects and its support to try and hit those targets. And if it's in the comprehensive plan, that is a huge bonus to going and finding that money and that support to make those projects happen. So if you've got ideas, let us know so we can get it into the comp plan so we can actually make it happen.
Any other questions about filling out the survey? The survey. Well, thank you, Ben. Just to add to what Ben said at the end there, we're going to spend a little bit of time at the end talking about grants and the role that may play in some significant things that the village needs to do. And every grant application we fill out references or refers to or asks how this fits with the village's vision plan or comprehensive plan. So it's very important that we have a good and relevant document to use. The next item we're going to talk about is the Street Tree Advisory Committee. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a Street Tree Advisory Committee. And that earlier incarnation of the committee essentially inventoried many of the trees in the village right-of-way on public property. And it was a useful tool at the time, but not very much was done with it after that. Over the last couple of years, it's become more obvious to us that we need to address the health and safety of some of these trees. And so when we reformed the committee about a year and a half ago, I asked Ben Carver to chair it, and they've done quite a bit of work. And I will turn it over to him to give an update on what they've been doing. So, that is very strange. I can't hear myself.
So our work over the last year and a half, as Gordon mentioned, has been largely focused on the long term. We've been focusing on securing grant funding so that we can conduct a comprehensive inventory and work plan for the trees in the village. But we have also been acutely aware that there are some trees that represent a risk in the short term. Bulk of these trees, as you may notice, are sugar maples that line almost all of our streets, the bulk of which were planted right around 1900, so they're aging. Some of them are aging quite well, some of them not so gracefully. Given the stresses of the life of a tree by a street with traffic and construction and all of those things, it's actually quite surprising how well they're doing. But there are substantial risks. If you look around, you don't have to look that far to find them. They are there. So in order to address that risk, we first inventoried the trees using sort of a simplified risk matrix, which is a fairly standard process. And that allowed us to rank the trees in the village, so we can come up with kind of a rough idea of which tree represents the most risk to property, people, vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic, that kind of thing. Using that list, we were able to work with individual homeowners, the DPW, and also Aswan, who's a NICEAG contractor, to remove some of the worst trees in the village, some of the ones that we felt were a concrete and immediate risk that we just couldn't leave. So of the 30 that we initially identified as posing some risk, about 10 excuse me, were removed in 2019. At the same time, the committee drafted and this board approved a new tree law. That law lays out some of the basic parameters for planting, some guidance for pruning in the hope that we can increase the longevity and reduce the risk of any trees moving forward. The law also requires the permission from the committee to remove any trees in the right-of-way. And currently we're working on ways, and this is sort of at the brainstorming stage, so if you have any ideas, please reach out, that we can encourage homeowners who do remain responsible for their trees, even when they're in the right-of-way, to remove those trees so that we can increase the safety of the village as a whole. Excuse me. And at the same time, any trees that are removed, we'd like to encourage people to replace those trees so that canopy cover can be maintained and all of those sorts of things. So again, any ideas would be greatly appreciated. Obviously, the general idea is to increase as much as possible the aesthetic and environmental impacts while also reducing risk. I think I'll end it there, although obviously, as Gordon said, there will be Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions now or into the future, I could talk about trees probably all day. So I would appreciate that. Also, if you'd like to reach out to the staff, there are, I guess I'll sort of copy Ben's move, but anyone who is on that committee, Don?
Just wanted people to understand that the DPW cannot remove trees for you. I know that people thought that they could just call them and have them remove trees. That is not the case. They are not liable. They don't have the appropriate training to down trees and remove them. I want to put that out there because there's been a misconception.
Right. And so just to clarify, that is kind of a tricky point. It's important to emphasize, I think, that generally homeowners are responsible for the trees at their house. even into the right of way. That is your responsibility. Our new law reaffirms that. It does give the village the ability to remove if we decide to do that, but certainly it doesn't create any responsibility on our part to take that action. It remains all of your responsibilities individually to deal with liability issues that are or are not on your knowledge. We have been able to, because Ashland obviously is concerned with the utility lines and that kind of thing, we've been able to kind of work around and encourage them to take specific trees, but it is not something that is necessarily, it's not a long-term strategy.
Question in the back.
How do you interface with NICEAG, and how do you interface with the state on state highway right-of-ways?
We have not had to do anything with the state so far. NICEAG is fairly easy. Justin Vanderzee, our new DPW, well, I guess he's not new anymore, our DPW supervisor, has a working relationship with the Asplund crews. So when they come, they meet regularly and, you know, have coffee and that kind of thing. So they can go from there fairly easily. Yep.
Yeah, question, so if a homeowner takes a tree down
Yeah.
at the, say, the street line, and they're responsible to get rid of it and all.
After obtaining the permission of the committee.
Well, yeah. So, is the village willing to help the homeowner replace the tree?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that we're brainstorming. In an effort to try to maintain canopy cover, ideally, the village would help remove the most dangerous trees in the village, and then also replace or grind the stumps or that kind of thing. But we haven't worked out exactly a plan how to make that happen. Part of that we'll be figuring out as we move into budget season, what we can afford to do, and what we think would be the most effective strategically. So the answer is maybe. Historically, the DPW has been, I think, really great and very willing to help, but not in any sort of systemic way. So it's played out in a kind of an unfair way, or a way that was uneven, I guess is a better way. So we're hoping to make a more comprehensive, universally applicable plan. So
Okay,
we
so
can
somewhere down the line, then maybe the homeowner can get some financial help
I hope so,
to
yeah.
buy a new tree.
Say the original street tree commission was mainly paying for trees that you were putting in your yard.
Right, so originally, yeah, they were mostly
Yeah.
planting new trees, yeah.
Yeah, Jared.
So has your focus mostly been on danger trees and
Yeah.
ugly trees?
Not
To what extent have you looked at or evaluated site distances when it comes to driving in the village, and especially at each corner? Because there are some large trees that are large trunked with lots of views, and bushes for that matter.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We have addressed that to some degree. Like I said, the new law has planting guidelines that take that into account. As far as removing established trees that may be in the way, we haven't really looked at that. But if you have an example, I'd certainly go look at it and we could see, you know, if it's definitely a risk to health and safety, then that's worth looking at. I mean, that's been, the unfortunate thing is that the process has up until now been reactive. It's been safety issues that are already in place and then dealing with those issues. So we haven't been able to take the sort of forward-looking steps yet that we would like to, and that would probably fall into that category, I would think.
Okay, well, you know, I generally don't have a problem with calling things out when I see them, and some people know, but I don't really want to call out specific trees.
Well, I mean,
on
personally,
some
I mean, you don't have
property.
to do it right now. I mean, and this goes for anyone. If you have a dangerous tree, I would love to look at it. We are compiling a list of trees that are, you know, something that we may have to deal with in the future, or that kind of thing. So we have a list. I would love to take a look individually, or, you know, send me an email with the address. That'd be great.
One of the things I learned through this from Ben is that there is actually a professional standard for what is considered dangerous. And it's not at all what I thought it was. So if there are any concerns, part of the purpose of the committee is that you now have a place to go If you're concerned about a tree, maybe you're concerned about a tree on your own property. You know, if I've got a tree that's close to my house and I think, you know, is this gonna come through my living room at some point? There's a way to have a good professional estimate done, and we're fortunate to have Ben as a professional in the industry who can make an evaluation of that. The law and the village's responsibility really lies in the right of way, but it's certainly a resource to residents if you have concerns outside of the right of way.
Is there any consideration of the possible effects of the ash borer in tree planting?
So again, unfortunately, we are reactive, which means we're dealing with a backlog. The ash borer is in the village now. It is very much, it's actually, the first time I saw it was right next to this property right there. So it is in town. We have, as part of our inventory, listed ash trees that are on village roads and village streets. But they don't quite rise to the level of imminent immediate threat yet. But the time is very close again, I would say, unfortunately.
I live on El Dorado Drive, and a number of years ago, Asplund came along and lopped off 2 sugar maples, which actually are on the Route 96 side of the road. The trees have deteriorated over the years. I mean, they look horrible in the wintertime now. There is some leaves that, you know, come on in the summertime, but eventually those trees are gonna have to come down, and I don't think I should be responsible for paying for them to come down.
Yeah.
And I have been in touch with your brother, I know your brother, so,
Yeah.
regarding those trees, so.
Yeah, you are responsible, unfortunately. Yeah, like I said, hopefully we will have a way that the village can help moving forward, but we don't. And even when we do, it will probably be only for trees that are a risk to the public. So I can't picture them exactly, but unfortunately, yeah, that's the responsibility. Although if we'd like to move to a village-supported tree, I don't know, program, we could certainly do that, but we'd be looking at a pretty hefty pay.
Let's wait until after we talk about the budget before we
Yeah.
Any
Well, to that end, I'm wondering if,
fill out the survey?
if there's, oh, sorry, if there's a tree on my property that I do need assistance interfacing with NICEAG and ASLUD so that I can feel comfortable with the procedure moving forward, understand what it'll do so I can maintain the tree in the future, is that something this committee can help me liaise, so I don't feel like, wait, they just knocked this off,
You
now
can
it's
certainly
dead.
call Asplund yourself and
Yeah.
deal with it, but feel free to call us and we'll tell you what we can do after looking at the tree.
Great, thank you.
Anything else on trees? The next department we're going to talk about is our police department. I will hand it over to trustee Keith Hannon, who does have an update on ongoing initiatives and things that the department had accomplished in 2019.
Thank you, Rorden. Thanks everyone for coming out today. Nice to see so many volunteers for the community in the audience, so thanks for all that you do, and actually see some younger folks in the audience today, so hopefully you're here out of curiosity, not because you're being punished. We need more young faces in civic duty, so please keep coming to be punished. So most of my report is going to be around our, last year I spoke about how we were bringing on 2 full-time officers for the first time in the history of the village. And we saw a lot of reasons why to do that. Mostly because it would allow us to have the same faces on duty more consistently, and those faces also happen to be Trumansburg people. So we really were big on getting officers out into the community, having them connect more with store owners and the school district and our citizens. And so this report really is going to speak to all of that. So here's some of the topics I'm going to cover. And because I think our department has done such great work, I'm going to read a lot of bullets here. I'm typically not a paper reader, but for their sake, I want to make sure I get it all right because I think they've done some great things. I don't want to gloss over everything. So I'll try to move quickly. And then if anyone has any quick questions, you can throw them at me, and if you think about anything during the break, we can talk then too. With regards to criminal and vehicle and traffic law, well, first of all, our total number of calls went up from 1,987 to 2,541. So a lot of these stats and bullets I'm going to read are really just a reflective, again, of having our department on duty more often and not having to rely on the sheriff's department or the state troopers as much. And because it's the same people coming in and working every day, tasks aren't, sitting dormant. So a lot of times what would happen in the past is because we had so many part-timers, they would get assigned an investigation and they're really only working on it when they're back on duty. And if they're only working, 8 hours a week, that makes it hard to really make progress in a lot of these cases. So a lot of what you're going to hear in this report is just that changing and us being able to be more productive because of it. So total number of calls to service increased by almost 550. Total number of traffic tickets we issued was up 8%, and that includes more DWI arrests. Total number of parking tickets issued increased 40. Apologize if you got one of those, but trying to enforce laws here. We had an increase in sex offense investigations that were handled by our full-time officer, and it allowed more thorough follow-up and continuity. We improved our management of local sex offenders, including improvement of and organization and monitoring of the Sex Offender Registry Act. Better relationships with the New York State Liquor Authority, and as well as really improved our working relationships with local bars and restaurants. We did an overhaul of our property and evidence department. And again, these increasing calls for service are part of having more officers on duty and having them more available because of our extended hours of service. In terms of community engagement, we had more officers at more village meetings. Our officers were more visible at Town of Ulysses Court when assigned and available. And we had more dedicated responses to all fire and EMS calls, as our police were frequently kind of the first on the scene and they could help assess the situation and relay that information to our fire and EMS department. We had a dramatic increase in property checks for homeowners. So these are situations where maybe you're going out of town for a month and you want the police to stop by and make sure everything's okay with your house and your property. Those number of checks went from 126 to 351 last year. So that's one number I really like because we're really providing a great service there. And additional property checks include being able to monitor our sewer plant, dump, and our parks. We've developed better relationships with some of our local organizations, such as Rotary. We're playing an increased role with their Cops, Kids, and Toys initiative. And we've increased our relationships with outside agencies, including Seneca County Sheriff's Department, Tompkins County Sheriffs, and Trumansburg EMS, and fire. And one event we had that was a really great event and well attended was our first responder open house that was held and developed for the community to meet and interact with our local first responders, and that was spearheaded by one of our full-time officers. We've also had some really great increased engagement with our school district. We have a daily presence and patrol at all 3 school buildings during arrival and dismissal. The reason we prioritize arrival and dismissal, especially arrival, is because statistically, if there's ever going to be an incident at the school, it's typically in that first few minutes or hour of the day. Dedicated attendance at school functions when available, including athletic events and dances. Dedicated attendance and participation at continuous lockdown drills. And created the inception of an officer assigned and dedicated to weekly participation in the leadership in action class, the high school, which has allowed us to build partnerships with students through community school projects and services. And we also initiated Red Ribbon Week, a national drug awareness campaign brought to the school district by the police department. And that includes They include assemblies, projects, and food drives, as well as some other events throughout the week. Some new initiatives with regards to the school district is they've agreed to pay half the salary of a new crossing guard at South Street and Wake. So we see a lot of, we had the department monitor that intersection, and it was determined that yes, it is a heavily used intersection for kids going to school. So we wanted to add a crossing guard there, and the school offered to pay half of that. That position is still vacant, as far as I know, so if anyone's bored in the morning, or the afternoon, maybe find a friend, you split it, and take turns morning and afternoon. I'll bring coffee, does that help? I'll walk coffee up to the top of Wake Street there. We're also currently in the very early stages of investigating whether or not to make that lower part of Wake and the last part of South Street a school zone. Because of the number of cars combined with the number of pedestrians. Chief and some of the officers have monitored those areas, and especially on Wake entering the school campus, they're a little concerned by the speeds that cars go down that in the morning and during school hours. So that's not a definite. It's being considered. And certainly if you have opinions on that, we will make sure there's an opportunity to offer those. Last couple things, grant writing. One thing I've really enjoyed about having our full-time officers is how involved they've been with writing grants and getting money from the state and federal government, which helps subsidize some of our budget. So here's some grants that we applied for and will be continuing to apply for. We wrote an application for we received a grant, the 2020 Child Passenger Safety Grant. We were awarded $1,500. That was by the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee, and that grant was written by one of our full-time officers. Writing of and applying for the 2020 Police Traffic Services Grant. We were awarded just over $2,600 for that. That was also written by one of our full-time officers. And a request for 2020 Stop DWI grant funds were awarded in the total of $2,500. And that was granted by Tompkins County Stop DWI, and that was requested by one of our full-time officers. We have 3 or 4 grants that we're in the process of pursuing right now that are due, I think, by the end of March. So I'll have more updates on that in some of our village meetings. All of these grants are being written and applied for by our full-time officers, and I'd be remiss not to highlight Mackenzie Covert, who has done the lion's share of a lot of this work and really helped us get involved in the school district as well. So she should be applauded. And our goals and plans for you can literally applaud. And so real quickly to finish up, our goals and plans for 2020, continuing to write more grant applications, including a 2020 COPS grant for dedicated SRO in the school district. That's being written by our full-time officer. Applying for a micro grant for community services initiative, so that would be like our open house and the Red Ribbon Week and things like that to help offset those costs. Again, applying for the Child Passenger Safety Grant. Again, writing the 2020 version of the Police Traffic Services Grant. And we'll also be planning another first responder open house with the fire department and EMS. And organizing and implementing a neighborhood watch program. As you may recall, there was over the summer, I believe, we had a string of break-ins, which kind of created a lot of conversation about keeping an eye on neighborhoods and streets. So that's kind of where that came from. And also organizing and implementing a program for senior members of our community. We'll also, as many of you know, there's a hotly debated legislation that came out from the state regarding bail and evidence reform, and so certainly that impacts our work as a police department. So we're continuing to adjust to that as needed. That impacts all police agencies, and we're certainly not immune to those changes. Not looking to debate whether it's a good legislation or bad legislation, but certainly we are impacted by it. So that's my report. And if there's any immediate questions, Dolores.
Tell me what an SRO is?
School resource officer. At least in this context, I'm sure. If you Google that acronym, you're probably going to get 50 things. Yes, Don.
Keith,
Sorry, one question per household.
not together anymore. That's a great list, you know. I think that's just really terrific. Being the sort of normal greedy person, I'd like to add one thing to it.
Okay.
A lot of people walk on the streets all the time. Quite a few of us have done counts. I know on Bradley Street there are intervals during the day when there are many more people walking than there are vehicles going by. So we really need to get the 25-mile-per-hour thing working a lot better than it does.
Okay.
Up until a few years ago, I would see, I'm kind of an outdoor guy, have a house on both sides of the street and out there all the time doing stuff. I used to see a patrol car every day, just about. I won't tell you how few I see now. I haven't seen one yet this year on Bradley Street. And I'm out a lot. It's winter, so I'm not out as much as summer, but I'm out a lot. I think we really need to get on that. And there's some places that are really problematic where we used to see radar setups, like on Seneca Road. The former mayor and the former sheriff lived over there. It might have had some influence, but there used to be a patrol car sitting down there pretty often, and cars go very fast on Seneca Road now.
Okay.
Bradley Street is kind of the Pizza Express. If you work anywhere up around the cluster of businesses that are at the county line, and you want to get to the pizza shop really fast without passing the radar car on Main Street, you go down Seneca and down Bradley. You can 45, 50 is easy, and you get the pizza while it's still hot. Lunchtime every day, we have Pizza Express on.
Well, first of all, if you weren't so greedy, you might still be together. Second of all, I totally I appreciate that feedback, and I don't know if it's a matter of we're seeing because of writing tickets being up. I don't know if Chief has said there's so much demand on these other roads where people are speeding, but I will certainly forward that on, and we'll make sure there's an increased presence over there. Yes.
Just to follow up on that, I wondered if there's been any consideration, and maybe this is actually a DPW question, to traffic calming measures on those streets in that area. We're on Congress Street, and there's a different sort of speedway there. There have been radar signs repeatedly over the last few years that don't actually seem to do very long. And some of those very wide traffic bumps, of which there's now a lot in Ithaca, are sort of a pain in the neck, but they would definitely slow down traffic. So I wondered if there's been any consideration of that as a method on some of the really intensely residential streets.
The issue with those bumps is the plowing. Do you want snow or do you want?
Well,
they are definitely an issue.
I'm assuming that, so in Ithaca, they have just done that regardless of ability to plow?
They also have their own. I'm sorry. First of all, I do know that their plowing equipment is far superior to our pickup trucks, so that have plows on the front of them. And we do not invest in that type of plowing equipment. Right.
It actually was something that was brought up about eight-ish years ago, 2011, 2012. And everything's a trade-off, right? So I mean, it was considered, the police chief at the time was not in favor, or DPW supervisor at the time was not in favor. It would certainly slow things down, including the plow trucks. So it's certainly something we can mention to Chief Nelson, see what he thinks. We can mention it to our DPW supervisor, see what he thinks. But as we'll hear in a minute, when we're talking about how do we spend money efficiently, that might be something that's harder to justify.
I'll take a slightly different tack on that though. I do think there are lots of options when it comes to traffic calming that aren't just humps as well. So that's something that I've been thinking about going into the comprehensive plan, and feel free to give input into that plan as far as areas that might be useful. I don't know if there'll be any ability for us to actually go this way, but thinking more holistically about a kind of street plan for the village from a traffic perspective has been something that's been brought up to me through our interactions with Cornell Local Road Program. They've kind of helped us look at some intersections. Their feeling is that it's a small enough area we may be able to look at kind of a holistic approach. Of course, that's a big project, a lot of money, so I have to kind of think about that as well, but something again to kind of put as a desire in the comprehensive plan and see if that can be done over the next long while.
Yeah, in fact,
I live on another speedway, I live on King Street, and in terms of road safety, a couple of things that possibly we can do more community education about. And I look at it on our street because we have absolutely no sidewalks, and we have very heavy trucks on our street, a lot. A lot of the pavers come through there. I've seen 18-wheelers, I've seen tankers that can't make the corner and have to back all the way down, etc. But the one thing that I think as pedestrians, of which we have many, the one education thing that strikes me is that many, many people still walk with their back to traffic. And they don't act like they know I'm coming in a car, and knowing that we have nowhere for people to go, particularly in the winter when it's maybe plowed up. That just strikes me as that's something that people are supposedly educated about, but maybe police and village can let people know once again. I mean, I can certainly write letters to the editor about it, but I'm amazed at how many people walk with their back to traffic, including the daycare with the young children. And I would like it if they were asked by somebody in uniform sometime to move your kids on the other side.
I think that leads to Yuba Street, where the sidewalks are probably the worst in the whole village. I walk almost every day. And, Yuba's so narrow, and then it has that curve coming into Congress. So you tend to walk on the wrong side, because you don't want a car coming around the curve and hitting you on the sidewalks too. It's dangerous to walk on. So I think all those things make that situation.
there's time for maybe two quick questions.
I got just two, how far out of the village do you patrol?
We will support Ulysses if there's a call for service and we're the closest in the area, but we won't typically go too far beyond the town.
There's no actual patrol outside the village boundary.
Well, that's just, I was just wondering.
However, the way that emergency response is managed in Tompkins County, if 911 dispatch needs a law enforcement officer, they know where every police car in the county is. And if we're the closest one and the call is in the town, they will call us to go.
Now, well, actually, what brought this up is my granddaughter got popped with a headlight, but she was far out of the village when the police made a U-turn to catch her. So I just wondered what their authority is and how far. I suppose it's just like the park systems or something.
If she was seen in the village with a headlight out,
Yeah.
they can pull her over wherever.
Yeah, but she was not in the village. Okay, now, I had,
You get that fixed.
because of that, I had reason to go visit the police station. And I was astounded at your stairway into that building. There must have been some Williams, was there?
Well, certainly
It's on the list.
the state of our first responders facilities is a hot topic, and I think we're gonna dive into that.
For that stairway specifically, we do have a lot of material already purchased, and we do plan on getting on that in the spring. Yeah.
It's a simple project.
It's unfortunately more complicated than you what everything is. It's gotta be ADA compliant. There's been more than what we wanted to repair that, but we're looking into it. Yeah, Jerry.
It seems that, back to the speed limits and stuff, that most of our speed feedback signs are pole mounted now instead of the trailer that we used to see around more. Is that gone away now, or is that still an option?
You mean where it actually shows your speed up? We still have access to those. Those are typically put out when we're studying the speed patterns of a particular street.
Well, because as far as Seneca Road, I'm in prime spot, bottom of the hill, and people are flying. Even this week, taking the trash out, I was flagging people. So they are more than welcome to use that right away on the corner of my property.
So I wrote down a few of these streets, including that one, and I'll make sure that Chief knows there's plenty of concerns revolving around those roads and speeds. And maybe we just need to run New York Pizza out of town. I'm just kidding.
Last question, I believe.
Yeah, is there an update on the corner of Falls and Cemetery Road and the stop sign?
Is there ever? The intersection of Falls and Cemetery Road, and we will not entertain questions on this until the intersection of Falls and Cemetery Road is now a four-way stop. The town of Ulysses controls two of those stop signs. So if you see the stop sign on the corner headed towards Lake Street on your right, essentially in Smith Woods, belongs to the town of Ulysses. If you have questions about that stop sign, please contact Deputy Supervisor Nancy Zaylor, who unfortunately is not here today. The stop sign, which had previously been on the village side of Cemetery Road, southbound towards Main Street, which was taken down, is now back up. There was some debate about whether to return it to a three-way stop or a four-way stop. Everyone from DPW to law enforcement suggested that four-way stops are much easier to understand, navigate, and enforce than the rarely seen three-way stop.
Can our police enforce all four of them?
Yeah, that might be the most local politics thing ever. The intersection, we only own half of the stop sign. In closing, I'll also add, since we're kind of on this topic, almost a year ago, I asked the New York State Department of Transportation to take a hard look at our Main Street in terms of what can we do to help control speeds on our Main Street. Now that's a little tougher because it's a state-owned road, and so they won't go below 30 miles per hour. But I know there's much concern over blind spots on the crosswalks. We have the mini village right there where a lot of kids play. There's just a lot of crossing between Gimme and Creekside, and there's probably 3 or 4 spots where you can easily kind of get hidden behind cars. So that is a department in the state that isn't known for their quick turnaround, but they every so often I check in and they tell me I'm still on the list. So I sent them some satellite photos with circles around trouble areas, and so they're going to help hopefully find ways to help us slow things down there. Especially anyone that's spent some time with the Taking Care of T-Bird folks, during a weekday you see how many 18-wheelers come cruising through our village. So we're going to try to do whatever we can on that front as well.
We can circle back at the end if folks have more questions on police, traffic, or otherwise. I do want to move along in the interest of time to a brief update on our fire and EMS department with Trustee Carver and Trustee Darko. So before I jump into this, I actually want to just quickly take a moment to publicly thank Tom Major. I'm sure you all know Tom. This was his 57th and last summer running the summer recreation program in the village. So if you see him, please say thank you. We did have an award ceremony and a thank you celebration for Tom, so I won't rehash the whole thing, but I assume, based on the applause, that most of you know Tom, have known Tom. I think we all agree that he's 57 years. So please say thank you.
but with that, I'll move on. For those of you who have been following along, coming to these meetings, coming to our regular meetings, you all know that like many rural EMS departments across the country, ours has been facing increasing pressures in the form of state regulations, both on our providers and on the department as a whole. And as you may remember in our sort of data number heavy presentation last year, our call volumes have also been increasing steadily for many, many years. So in order to keep up with that changing landscape and maybe even in an ideal world stay a step ahead, this board has decided to move from a working supervisor model in our EMS department to a more, to a true EMS administrator position. Now, as you might be able to imagine, we knew that this new vision of the position would require an exceptional person in terms of qualifications, experience, and character in order to lead the department. So we were all really very excited when we found Chris Fox's application in the pile. Even more so after we conducted our interview with him, after this board met with him. We knew that his blend of passion for our agency specifically, but also his experience both in the private sector, as a personnel manager and business administrator, and his work as an EMT would be the absolute perfect fit for the position. So I'm here, I'll sort of skip the general EMS thing as much as possible. I know we're going to get into it a little bit more later, but I'm here specifically now to welcome Chris Fox to our EMS department. I hope in future years he will be here. He's been on board only a short amount of time, so I don't think he was really comfortable for the, he'll be here briefly, because working weekends is standard. But anyway, I'm here mostly to welcome Chris. We're all extraordinarily excited to have him on board, to be moving in this direction. It is an industry that is truly challenging, and we are truly excited to have someone as exceptional as he is to help us move forward. He's not here now, but he may be soon. Oh, that's right. You'll all meet him, I'm sure.
Where's he
around.
from? Where's he from?
Where is he?
He's local?
He's local.
Yeah, what is local? He doesn't live like right there, but it's close by. Yeah, and he has worked for our agency for a number of years. He's not an import for sure. But I'll turn it over to Ben.
I'll similarly try and keep this brief. The fire department, or the fire company, is also seeing a kind of shift in leadership after 16 years of dedicated service as chief. Jason Bolton is decided to hang up his chief's hat in April. He's done just an incredible job over the past 16 years with keeping a vibrant and just strong fire company for the village and for our surrounding municipalities that we work with. The volunteer fire companies are feeling similar kind of strains and stresses in rural areas, dwindling volunteer numbers due to just population shifts and people's differing visions of volunteerism, as well as just kind of dwindling population size and so forth. We're really incredibly lucky to have the strong, well-staffed, if that's the right term, fire company that we do have here. So a huge thanks and gratitude to Jason for all of his work over 16 years. And then come April, Matt Taylor, who has been the deputy chief, will be stepping up and continuing the work there. I'm really excited to continue to work with him. He's shown a really great eye towards the structural side of the fire company, if that makes any sense, kind of looking at the budget, looking at the equipment that we need, really thinking deeply about how to continue to build a strong fire company for the future in a rural district with a large area such as ours and a diverse area that we cover. So looking forward to those changes. I think we'll continue to be in good hands. And yeah.
Any quick questions on fire and EMS? We are going to circle back to it at least twice more, so we can entertain questions later if there aren't any right now. Next, we're going to get an update on our DPW water and sewer department.
And I'm going to be really quick this year. Every year before, I've talked about projects. Well, the projects are completed. 2019 was basically an operational execution year. We're just putting things in place, fixing anything that wasn't quite right, particularly at the sewer plant. We changed to fiber optic from Ethernet. We put in some uninterrupted power supplies, things that were missed in the original planning. We also finished the press building at the sewer plant. As far as water, we've just been moving along on water. It's working just fine. And DPW, we just doing regular maintenance. For 2020, the things that we're going to be focusing on is we're going to buy monthly water and sewer billing effective April of 2020. I intended to get that done last year and didn't get to it, but it will be start in April of this year. We have been working with MRB on our sewer law, and that is going to take several versions, several meetings, and probably several months before it'll be finalized. But that is a goal of 2020. And I just wanted to speak to oil and stone on roads. In all years past, we've had very major issues on some roads, and we've had to asphalt them. So every year you see them go out, we're going to go do certain roads. We've gotten to the point where most of our roads are in decent shape. If we continue to asphalt them, they get above grade and then add to the stormwater issues because they're pushing everything into your yards. So when you see this summer where we do oil and stone, it's because we do not want to add to the height of the road. And I know that I never knew that was the reason that they did it because it used to annoy me to have stones in my yard, but I wanted everyone to be aware that that will be happening this year. We will be seeing oil and stone on some of our roads. And lastly, our goal this year is to have a community build of 100 yards of sidewalk at some point. So the point has not been identified, and neither has all of the budget. So, and I know it's a community build, but there's still money involved. But it is our intent to do that. And that's actually all I have.
I see one hand up in the back.
Yeah, when you talk about sewer, I assume you mean sanitary sewer and not storm sewers. What is your current process for reviewing and approving changes to storm sewers in the village?
So storm sewers, you're actually getting ahead of me. That's part of, we're going to address, or I'm going to address that here in a few minutes. The sewer law that Deb references is sanitary sewer. It's the original sanitary sewer law written in 1966. Hasn't been looked at since. And so with the upgrade to the sewer plant, we needed to bring a lot of things up to date in that law. So that's what's being reviewed now. Sanitary sewer is something that should really be folded into a comprehensive stormwater management plan, which is on the table for 2020 in terms of a project, which I'll speak to briefly in a few minutes.
Thank you.
If you're going to go to bi-monthly billing for the water and sewer, then what is going to be the date? Now we pay.
It would be 2/3 of what it is today. I don't have the number in front of me, sorry.
It's not going to be billed the same amount, 79 every 2
No,
months.
the rate is not changing. It is just 2/3 of the whatever.
Are there any plans to address the deteriorating bridge at the bottom of Cemetery Road where it crosses Trumansburg Creek?
So funding has already been allocated from New York State. Villages, interestingly enough, villages in New York State are not allowed to own bridges. So that bridge is technically owned by the town. The funding comes through Tompkins County, and they are in engineering right now with the design. They're in the design phase of the engineering for the bridge. So we will have updates as we get them from the town. We're probably looking at this summer, late summer, depending on engineering and contracting. The village is not a direct participant in that because we don't own the bridge. But at some point this summer, I expect it to be this summer, we will see that that portion of cemetery will be closed off for construction.
The fire hydrant in front of El Dorado Drive has been covered in plastic for over a year. I'd like to know if and when that hydrant is ever going to be operational.
I will check with the fire chief on that.
Thank you.
Chris, I'm just wondering what kinds of things are in a sewer law. I've never seen one. Does it have to do with like what you can put down the drain or?
The draft we received yesterday is about 230 pages, about everything you can imagine. A lot of it is dictated by DEC and the EPA, but it also covers who owns, for instance, the laterals from the house to the sewer main. It can include, and part of the reason for the review is fines and penalties for putting things in the sewer that don't belong, tying in sump pumps, for example, into your sewer main that has never been properly enforced. I will tell everyone that if you think you might have a sump pump tied into a sewer main in your house, there will be no harm, no foul if you ask DPW to come and confirm, and then you correct it. Going forward, the fines will be hefty. Now, how we police that is a question that remains on residential property. I'm not a fan of knocking on doors and saying we're coming in to look at your basement. Commercial property, on the other hand, will be heavily enforced. Any commercial property owner must have a fire inspection annually, and we will be using that opportunity to take a look to see that everything is in compliance, not only with fire code and building code, but also with our sewer law.
Jerry?
Hi, Deb. On water. Overall, the system's good and things are going well. If anybody's got wood, please knock on it, because I'm just wondering how our infrastructure is. I know last year was rough with
We
water
have
main
not
breaks.
had a single water break, knock on wood,
You said that out loud.
So,
since the
is
beginning
there
of
a
winter.
way
It's unheard of,
is
since
there
I've
a way
been here.
to evaluate kind of where the system is? At least we know how old things are in certain part of the village, and I know prevention's probably tough, but is there a way to?
We are reactive rather than proactive, and that's because the only way to be proactive is to be in the pipes all the time to know where they are. And we did evaluate, I think 2 years ago, we did an evaluation of the cost benefit of that, and it was outrageously not effective. So we do a reactive process. That being said, and that's on the water side, but on the sewer side, because we're still investigating I&I all over, we are televising a number of our pipes to identify anything in here. So on that side, we're a little bit more proactive.
Can you say what I&I is?
Input and
Inflow and infiltration. So with sewer, on the sewer end of things, when we have stormwater draining into our sewer lines, it's a stressor on our sewer plant. And so it's an ongoing, it's actually something that, I don't want to get out in the weeds here, it's something that every municipality that has a sanitary sewer treatment plant deals with. There's quite a bit of funding that comes from New York State to investigate and try to mitigate that. On the water side of things, it's actually a fantastic segue, unless you have anything. It's a fantastic segue into village budget. Water and sewer, of course, does not impact our property taxes. We pay user fees for those. But anytime we're looking at efficiencies or inefficiencies in how we spend a dollar, there is that cost benefit. So we might like to have sidewalks everywhere. We might like to have speed bumps to slow traffic down, and then buy the appropriate equipment, and then hire the staff to run it when it's winter, because we do get, most years, a lot of snow. But we have to weigh this cost benefit out. And there's certainly a lot of room for opinion. But when we look at it as a board, we look at kind of top line. And I know you won't be able to see those numbers, so I'll go through it. Our budgeting process starts in February. So we're starting our budgeting process for next year. We find that our meetings, when we are discussing budget, are very poorly attended, if attended at all. So this is a hot button issue for Mr. Carver, so I'll put in a plug for please come to our budget meetings. We would rather you come to our budget meetings and learn why we spend what we spend. That is a more efficient use of everyone's time than kind of the after the fact, how come we're doing this approach that we tend to get. The village budget for the year we're currently in, wrapping up at the end of May, not counting water and sewer spending. So this is what impacts your property taxes. It's just a little north of 2.8 million. Small numbers when we hear about New York State budgets and $6 billion shortfalls, and of course we know what the federal government spends, but it's not a small number. Last year when we were evaluating the budget, we kind of put together this, which we'll make available online if you want to look at it more closely. These numbers are rounded, but of that 2.84 million, 57% of it is personnel. 57% of it is either direct employee pay, FICA and Medicare, the municipalities' contributions to New York State retirement, and health insurance. 57%. So whenever I hear someone say, you know, we need to cut the budget, I think immediately, who do you want to fire? That's question number one. 22% more goes directly to infrastructure. Other liability insurances, utilities, electricity, fuel, vehicle maintenance, supplies and equipment, and reserve money, which we set aside for particularly fire and EMS, but also DPW, so that when equipment needs to be replaced, we don't have to borrow to do it. So when you combine all of that with personnel, you're at 94% of our budget going to what I consider to be non-discretionary spending. There is roughly then 6% which goes to things like training. Training is generally a good thing. And then kind of I labeled it cultural. Farmers Market was in the Free Press last week. The kinds of things that we like to pay for as a community. I got some feedback, mostly positive, but some negative, to a letter that we sent out in conjunction with your village tax bills last June, which basically outlined what I call a math problem. The math problem, and again, you probably can't see the numbers, but the math problem is this. Our village-wide assessment has, for the last decade, gone up at roughly 2% per year. Most of that is your assessments going up. It's not actually new building. The levy, that is the percentage of the budget that we need to make up for with property tax, has gone up about 6.5% a year. Now, you don't have to be a math major to know that if your revenue is going up at 2% per year, but your expenditures are going up at 6.5%, you're going to run out of room at some point. For me, it's fairly cut and dry. There's just a math aspect of it. What is not cut and dry is what are the solutions? What do we do? One obvious thing we can do is to cut services. I'll get to that in a minute on a little bit of a broader conversation. But we have to really evaluate, why do we live in a village? What do we like about the village? And aren't we fortunate to have the services that generally operate very, very well as part of the reason why we choose to live in a village? I will say very briefly, I will make a brief comment on the C word, the C word being consolidation. Every once in a while I hear someone say, well, why doesn't the village and the town consolidate? Consolidation sounds like a very noble idea. The true word that should be used, or you should think of when you hear the word consolidation, is dissolution. Is there a reason, or is there a justifiable reason, rather, to dissolve the village? Consolidation does make sense in some communities where you have redundancy of services. If you have a town police department and a village police department, if you have a town fire department and a village fire department, it can make a lot of sense to see consolidation happen. It's certainly something that the governor pushes for every chance he gets. But in a community such as this, it doesn't make sense. And the reason why is because we are the only provider of some of these services in the region. We have to take a very hard look at whether we're serious about maintaining those services when we have the budget discussion. The other point that was made in the letter last summer is that if we don't or if we conclude that cutting services is not something that we want to do, then what is the only other choice? The only other choice is to encourage some kind of growth. Now, the village is not in the business or doesn't have the ability to force people to build, but we can certainly discourage people from building. So that needs to continue to be part of the conversation, is how do we allow for the village to continue to thrive? And if you spend any time on the road, driving through some of the communities in upstate New York, you realize that there's a lot of communities that are not thriving. Ours is. And so how do we maintain that? It's not something that's before the village board at the moment, but I will say something very briefly about annexation because it was in the paper. Annexation is something that a village can never initiate. Property owners, private property owners in particular, can request, and there's a very specific outlined methodology outlined in state law as to how they can do it. If a property owner or property owners outside the village boundaries wish to be annexed into the village for any reason, they can apply. It's a legal petition process. And there's a lot of bad information floating around about what annexation means. Annexation basically means, if it happens, that a property owner becomes part of the village. They don't stop being part of the town. The town doesn't lose property tax revenue now or in the future. You pay property tax bill to the town as part of your county tax bill. It simply means that that property owner, if they were annexed into the village, would become part of the village. That is something that the village should be supportive of, from the very simple standpoint of additional potential revenue from whatever that property might be in the future to help support all of these services that we have. Other solutions that come to mind that we are focusing on, you've heard it a couple of times already, grant funding. There's a lot of money available from the state and federal government for all kinds of things, but you just have to know where to look and how to get it. It's that last part, the where to look and how to get it part, that's not easy. We have on the board discussed the possibility of hiring a grant writer. I'm thinking of ways that we can incorporate that into some of the existing roles within the office. And then my personal soapbox, or what has become my personal soapbox over the last many months. Trustee Carver mentioned that we've hired a new EMS manager. For about a year and 2 or 3 months, we did not have an EMS manager, which meant that the day-to-day issues that arise in the department, the putting out of the proverbial fires in the EMS department, not the fire department, fell to me and Tammy Morse, our village clerk, and I appreciate all of her heavy lifting when it came to much of that over time. And during that time, I began to gain a much better appreciation for what it is that our fire and EMS departments really do. I mean, I've known, but there's a saying I heard once that there's a difference between knowing something and fully appreciating its significance. I began to really appreciate the significance, the impact of what these departments do. And every once in a while, I'll hear, again, usually after budget time, from someone who didn't come to a single budget meeting, why do we spend so much on fire and EMS? We're a small village. Why do we need fancy trucks? Why do we need 2 ambulances? And the answer is yes, we are a small village of 1.2 square miles. Our fire department covers 56 square miles. Our ambulance department covers 110, and that is growing. Fire department is not likely to grow very much. It's an interesting curiosity of volunteer fire companies that the ones that are healthy seem to stay healthy. The ones that are not healthy struggle. Our fire company, as Ben mentioned, our fire company is in great health. We have great volunteers. We have young volunteers. Something about running into burning buildings seems to attract a lot of people, and God bless them for it. Ambulance, on the other hand, is a completely different story. New York State has essentially, through certification requirements and the like, has essentially killed the volunteerism aspect of ambulance response. And it's frustrating for me when I read an article in the Tompkins Weekly, as I did a few months ago, where this is now starting to get some state and national attention, and people are starting to ask, what do we do? How do we fix this? And the solutions, and I'm not picking on them as people, they're fine people, but the solutions that I hear from many people are essentially 19th century solutions to a 21st century problem. Well, we need more education. Maybe if we can have an EMT class in the high school, maybe we can get the 18-year-old graduate to volunteer as an ambulance driver. Well, that would be noble if it were possible, or even likely, but it's neither of those things. And so what has become something of a personal soapbox for me is trying to get to as many people as possible at the state and federal level to educate them on the fact that you have small municipalities like ours with departments that work. Our fire department works. Our EMS department works. They're fully staffed. But our EMS department budget crossed $1 million a year for the first time this year. Now, we contract with the surrounding towns of Ulysses, Hector, and Covert to provide them what they need in terms of ambulance protection or ambulance service, and so they pay a portion of that budget. But it doesn't change the fact that it is really, really expensive to run these departments. So of that $2.84 million that the village spends aside from water and sewer, about $1.6 million of it is fire and EMS. When you look at this region, and this little green area is us, that's the village, it's a significant piece of the geography between the beautiful Finger Lakes, between Cayuga and Seneca Lake, that this department covers. If this department weren't here, there would be no one else available. South Seneca Ambulance is perennially understaffed. Schuyler Ambulance is perennially understaffed. Slaterville Ambulance down here, ish, folded 3 years ago. And their response times went from, and Chief Fulton in the back can probably give you a better number, but their response times more than doubled. I don't like to necessarily play the anecdotal sad story card because that's what politicians are supposed to do, and I don't particularly like it. But I do know someone, and he's well known in the area. He's given a lot of his time to public service in the area. He's well known and well liked. And I won't mention his name for privacy reasons. But his brother died in November. His Coumadin, apparently, his medication was messed up and his blood was very thin. Cut himself in the bathroom and bled out before the ambulance could get there. If Slater Ambulance had still been in existence, he'd be alive today. I get, through an app on my phone, I get all of the calls anytime there's an emergency call to fire or EMS. And I think about the 3-year-old in respiratory distress just on the other side of the town line in Seneca County. If this didn't exist, this is real. And so when we think about village budget, and when I have these conversations with folks, some of whom are not so popular in this neck of the woods, but when I have conversations with congressmen, when I have conversations with Senator Gillibrand's office, I'm trying to get them to understand that in an environment where we have lots of debate about what government should and shouldn't do, it's an election year. What should government be doing? What shouldn't government be doing? What is the proper role of government? I don't like to debate those things very much because everybody's entitled to their opinion. But what I do say is that if the proper role of government isn't to provide life-saving and emergency services to people where they live, when they need it, then there is no proper role of government. And so what you're going to see is this continue to be an issue. It's going to hopefully start becoming one that's discussed at a broader level. And we are just very fortunate. And I caught some flack from some people for talking about Trumansburg being kind of a hub in the region. But when you look at this map, there really isn't any other way to think of it than we are fortunate to have these services. We're fortunate that whether through fate, providence, or just dumb luck, we ended up with these kinds of services that are struggling to survive everywhere else in New York State. And we have an obligation to make sure that they continue to thrive going forward. And with that, I will take a couple questions on budget before we break in a few minutes, if there are any. Yeah, Lauren.
Yeah, just quickly for information, I've heard, that the cost for training EMS volunteers or hired, that it's become more restrictive as far as the training and courses they have to take and all that kind of good stuff. And that it has become not only more involved with training, more training, that the cost of that has gone up considerably. And that a trainee is supposed to pay up front, take these courses, go through it, and then once they pass it all, then they can be reimbursed by the fire department. So how much of that is true or not true?
Well, training, training comes with a cost. Some of it is classes, some of it is certifications. What's really changed on the ambulance side over the last 25 or so years is the continuing education requirements. So it's really the time needed on the part of the employee or volunteer to maintain their certification that really becomes the burden. Now, if it's your job, if it's your profession, I have to take CE requirements in my profession. If it's part of your job or profession, that's one thing. But if you are, the reason volunteerism suffers, if you work a 40 or more hour a week job doing something else, and now you have to essentially maintain several hundred hours of continuing education every few years, it becomes really just not manageable to do that from a volunteer's perspective.
You said that the budget is 1.6 million for the fire and EMS. How much does that include or offset for what we reimbursed, or how much of that 1.6 million is reimbursed to the village?
It's essentially, it's split by call volume currently.
Yeah.
So of the 1.6 million of it is EMS. The village taxpayer pays about 20% of that. The rest of it is coming from contracts with 3 surrounding towns. Fire about the same. So the village taxpayer may only be on the hook for, say, 20% of the big number, but it's a number that's growing, much more so on the ambulance side. Andrew?
So, from what I'm hearing, I don't think these budget and finance issues are much different than any business, any other organization in general. As far as solutions, I mean, your comment that who are we going to fire as the first response, I don't know. I don't think that's necessary. My question is, most organizations are trying to balance cost, schedule, and quality. Nobody wants any of these services or quality reduced. So how do you do that for less cost? To what extent are we looking at efficiencies and improving and reducing waste and wherever we can? Is there anything going on as far as village administration to look at that end? Because you can raise revenues, but are you looking at cost cutting without assuming that means firing someone?
Sure. I hope you come to some budget meetings. We look at it every year. We look at it every single year. We look at what we pay people. We look at how many positions do we need. One example would be we actually have one of our DPW employees who's moving on to a different job. It's a career move for him, so I congratulate him on doing that. So we will be evaluating whether to backfill that position or not. Do we need 5 DPW employees or can 4 do the work? So we look at it all the time. The big difference between municipal budgeting and private sector budgeting is the levers we have available to pull on the revenue side are next to none. Our only lever, which is a big one, admittedly, is property tax. So we can choose to levy a number, but if we are sensitive to the costs to residents going forward, there really aren't a lot of other options. Contracting with towns for service for certain things is one, ambulance being one. Grant funding is another, which you've heard about already, and I'll mention again in a few minutes. But where to be efficient on the spend side is something we look at every budget year, and throughout the year.
So are we being as efficient as we can and reducing waste as much as we can, or is there room for improvement there?
Yes. Jeff?
So, help me understand the business model of the EMS services, and I guess maybe one basic question is that regulated? Are the fees that we can collect for the service to the clients regulated by not the village? So we can increase the cost, for example, to the client?
Contracting towns being the client or individual?
However, the income comes from the service provided.
So the village has the ability to, because when we talk about the towns, they are contracting parties. We have the ability to charge whatever we want.
Okay, it's not state regulated or,
However, because the ambulance department evolved out of the fire department, which uses a shared services model, we have historically always said we're going to have some way to divide this up quickly. On the patient side, because we do bill for ambulance services, and all of the towns do as well, we are limited by whatever the paying third-party payer is willing to pay. So there is a payment schedule, for instance, from Blue Cross Blue Shield will pay X for an ambulance ride. Medicare will pay much less, and Medicaid will pay even less. We have historically not gone after the individual for any differentiation. If you get a ride from Bangs, you're going to get a bill for the difference between what your insurance company paid and what they would like to charge. We have chosen not to do that. We recoup about a third of the budget overall. So if the EMS budget's $1 million, we get about $300,000 in billing revenue, but that is then spread between the towns who contracted. So if the ambulance ride originated in Coburg, they get that billing revenue. And so it's not overly complicated, but there's a lot of moving parts.
I think you said that training accounts for about 6% of the village budget. I wondered, that's actually quite a bit of money. I wondered if that includes the EMS training, or are those costs allocated to?
Training is about 1.4% of the
Oh, I'm
village
sorry.
budget, but it's in that last 6%.
Oh, I get it, okay.
And that would be training across the board, across all departments.
So the training is pulled out
Yes,
of each department?
yes. Yeah, no.
I'd like to help you out on your criticism. You've been criticized for calling Trumansburg a hub. It most definitely is a hub. You only have to walk downtown on a Friday night to see that people have come from all over to buy food and do the things that they are doing. This is a hub, everything from Tai Chi to, well, pizza. It's healthy. The other thing I'd like to say about consolidation of the town and the village, that kind of concept, I've been on boards and panels and so forth, for most of 30 years in both the village and the town, and still am. And I thought about this and talked about it with a lot of people a lot of times. And what I'd say at this point is two things. One, if I were a lawyer working for one of those law firms in Albany that specializes now in consolidation, I'd be a really happy guy. The second thing I would say about it is that the complexity that comes with it really hasn't been measured yet. And the complexity comes from this. If I lived on Swamp College Road, I would not want to pay for a sidewalk on Bradley Street. So, to take care of that, a district would be created. It's called district, a tax district, where people on Bradley Street and other streets would be taxed more than people on Swamp College Road. Just go ahead and extend this to every service that the village provides one by one, and think about what the administrative cost and the complexity and the lack of control would come with that. I don't think it would work. I tried to see it from both sides for a long time. I'm on this side now. You can hear where I am.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I would like to identify a potential additional source for revenue for ambulance billing.
Sure.
I can't speak to other people's insurance because it's a constantly evolving process. But my company has a company HSA reimbursement account for anything that's not covered. So if I'm not billed, I can't pay it. So if you build out the additional cost above and beyond reimbursement from the various providers, I could pay that. Other people might have similar insurance. And if they can't pay it, you just don't enforce collections. But there's let's say you get 30% of the people who get billed can actually cover the cost through an HSA account. That's 30% more than we're collecting now.
Thank you. Before we break, I will, I know the agenda says I allocated 45 minutes. That was a lie. It's not gonna take me 45 minutes to go through some projects and initiatives that we are focusing on for 2020, in addition to what you've already heard. The first one being stormwater management. There was a question earlier about storm sewers. Stormwater management is something that is not only anecdotally an issue, it's also well known that when we have rain events or thaws and whatnot, where the water goes is very important. For being a municipality in the side of a hill, we have a tremendous amount of water. We have very recently, within the last couple of weeks, been granted first stage approval for some grant funding through Assemblywoman Lifkin's office. It's going to be a smaller amount, hopefully about $125,000. There's still two hurdles that have to be dealt with at the state assembly level, but it seems it's something that she has to nominate. The assembly person has to nominate a municipality to receive it, and once nominated, it's not a foregone conclusion, but it's fairly good odds that we'll get that money. That money will be earmarked to take care of a couple, 3 or 4 hot spots in the village where stormwater and drainage is an issue. Through upsizing of pipes, through upsizing of culverts, try to get that water moving more efficiently. Second to that, we have our engineer, our village engineer, which is MRB Group. They have put together a proposal for what is known as a comprehensive stormwater management plan. The timing of it is good because we're revising our comprehensive plan. They don't necessarily intertwine exactly, but there is some overlap. It's not a small number. It's roughly $50,000 to have an engineering group put that together. I am planning to have the village apply for a Regional Economic Development Council grant in this year's funding cycle, and I believe the grant's starting in May. They have given a lot of money, or did give a lot of money last year to other municipalities for this kind of project. And so I would like to get, if we can, the grant funding to develop a more comprehensive plan for stormwater management. Study where the spots are and what can be done to properly mitigate excessive flow from those areas. Sidewalks. Tammy and I went back, I believe our first State of the Village was in 2013, and I'm sure that sidewalks has been on the agenda every year since. I expect that they will continue to be on the agenda. In addition to kind of the community build version that we do every year, I'm going to have the village, again, grants are the theme of the day apparently, apply for some grant funding for what I'm hoping will be sidewalk from Route 227 to the Seneca County line on West Main Street. I think tying in the north and western end of the village to the downtown is very important. It's not cheap. When we talk about the sidewalk project down South Street to Tamarack, Lake Street, the stretch from the village line to the SureSafe, that entire project ran about $1.3 million or $1.4 million. So it's something that we need assistance in order to do, but fortunately the money is available. We just hope that we are able to receive it. We've talked for several years about the need for a larger and more up-to-date fire and EMS building. You saw my plea and my pitch that I've been taking around to various places for the importance of these departments. This building dates back to the 1980s. It is no longer large enough for the operation that is our ambulance department and fire department. It lacks specific facilities such as hazmat decontamination. There's no adequate way to properly manage clothes that might have bloodborne pathogens on them. The things that are necessary in those departments, we don't have the proper facilities for them. My vision, my goal, hopefully, is to secure, if we can, assistance from the state, but probably more likely the federal government, to build a new facility on a yet-to-be-determined location that will be able to house the departments properly and accommodate any growth that might happen in the future if, for instance, the ambulance district were to grow, as it very well might over the next decade. This is very much in the This is very much in the outreach phase. You will likely hear things suddenly if anything good happens. And sometimes I think we're criticized as a board for not revealing all of the things that could happen if and when, maybe if, someone says yes. That's not really an efficient way to try to manage all of the things that go on. But do know that it is very near the front, if not at the front of the list of things that I want to see pushed forward in 2020. And last but not least, before we break, I am announcing today that this spring I will be forming a task force to initiate or investigate how the village might move, at least in the part of the village facilities itself, to some type of solar power for our electricity needs. The goal as it came to me was this. I spent a little bit of time on the road, and if you drive more than a few minutes outside of the village, you'll see a solar farm somewhere. And I thought to myself, if the village could secure grant funding to put up the panels, and if the village could secure enough funding to put up panels in excess of what it needs, and recoup revenue from the excess electricity that's put back on the grid, then could we not only move to an efficient source of energy, but also have it be paid for? And so I've had a couple of conversations with our friends at Renovis. I know some very general numbers, 4 acres per megawatt, $2 a watt, so you can kind of figure out it gets expensive fairly quickly. But what this task force will be tasked with is looking at, number one, what is the actual village-owned energy usage? So that would include the water distribution system, the pumps, our sewer plant, all of the electricity usage of the village. A, what is that? We kind of have an idea, but let's get that concretely defined. B, how much would it cost to put up panels somewhere to supply all of that energy? C, how much more would we have to build so that it can become a self-sustaining revenue generator to essentially zero out the electrical cost of the village, which would be then a savings to the taxpayer? D, where can we find the funding to pay for it so the village doesn't have to borrow to do it? And E, am I up to E? E, if it were feasible, and I have no idea whether this is possible or not, but if it were feasible, to secure funding large enough to build a solar farm large enough so that village residents could opt into it, what would that look like? And so you'll be hearing more about that come springtime. Yes. I would like to, before we break, I would like to recognize Chief Jason Fulton, who walked in a few minutes ago, sitting in the back of the room. Jason is, I don't believe, not leaving the fire company, so he will still be around, and we will have the ability to draw on his expertise in any situation where it might be needed. But thank you, Jason, for your, I believe it's 16 years of service as our fire chief. So thank you.
It's quick.
Fill out the survey.
Since we continue to have good press coverage, I hear in the corner clicking, I think it's worth noting that it was recognized at the State of the Village by a villager that the participation of Renovis in an equitable program could be very beneficial for them as a company. We could be a flagship for how they can work with small villages to provide for a larger community, just in case they're going to read anything or listening now.
I'm just curious if you've explored any other types of sustainable energy.
One thing at a time. This is the obvious one that comes to mind, simply because the costs continue to come down, the grant fund. Honestly, a lot of this comes down to where can we get money. If New York State and or the feds, or some combination of the two, are willing to help us pay for things, I realize it's all our tax dollars in the end, but in terms of village property taxpayer, I want to get as much of that as we possibly can. I think the village has done a good job in the past with some of it, certainly sidewalk projects and the like. We get, as Keith mentioned, we get small grants from various places for various things. But when I actually looked through the list of several hundred Regional Economic Development Council awardees in December. And I looked through the list of all of them, and I hate to call it a gravy train, but there's a lot of money being given away to a lot of municipalities for a lot of different things. And I think that if we don't try to tap into that as aggressively as we can, then we're missing out.
So I'm going to be stepping out in just a moment, but I just wanted to thank all of you for all the work that you have put into the village. I really do appreciate it.
We're not too far off schedule yet.
Projects and initiatives.
Yeah.
This is my own personal one.
Ah, yes.
This was inspired by the village, walking around the village of Homer, which has beautiful old houses. And many of the houses have dates. So I thought, well, that would be a good thing for Trumansburg, some of the older houses to have dates on the front. So I am this is through the conservatory, Trumansburg Conservatory. They are fronting it. I am making the plaques at no cost. Chris Wolf will be painting the numbers on them. He's a local artist. You will have to do your own research on your house. We researched our house, 15 Kega Street, and we could never come up with a date. But we know that Reverend Charles Bacon lived there in 1851. So this is circa. All the plaques will look the same, the date will be different. And this is through the conservatory. The conservatory is asking for a donation of $25. So I encourage anybody that wants to spend a little time researching the age of their house and beautifying Trumansburg, please follow up. I have some forms here, but it'll be coming out at the conservatory someday soon. So please follow up on that. It's great to walk around the village and see, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
I'll actually ask, do we want to break now for 10 minutes, or do we want to just keep going? Break. Let's break till 5 after, and then we'll come back to field any questions about almost anything.
I don't know.
Paging trustee Nancy.
Anyway. Bye. See ya. All right.
Room got empty quick.
Wow.
Waiting on one trustee. Well, we're not going to wait on him. Lost half.
I know, I got up extra early and thank you for all of you.
But it's Thursday, thank you for using our local business. Thank you. You're welcome.
So we are a much smaller group than we were 15 minutes ago, which is okay. I think we can be less formal this way. This is, what's that?
Now you have the cultivation.
So I see this as your time. Questions, questions, comments, preferably questions. Anything village related certainly, but any questions that you might have about any other issue, certainly now is the time to bring them up, either for individual members of the board or the board as a whole, and we can just take it as it goes. Yeah.
I don't know if this is the place for it, but I'm just wondering about an update on Crescent Way. How things are going there, and how to
Sure.
find out how things are going there.
So the proposed project at 46 South Street received preliminary approval from the planning board in October, at the end of October. There's a timeline then established of, I think it's 18 months, it's a long timeline, where the project developer then needs to submit a final. It's kind of, they have a preliminary final and a final preliminary and then a final final. They need to submit a final plat, is what it's called, that appears to be headed towards the village sometime in February, possibly March. That's not something they have to disclose, but they have a long time to do it. Once that is submitted, then it goes to the code and zoning officer to review if there are any changes from what was preliminarily approved versus what is finally submitted. And then there'll be a process for final approval at that point. And I think it's a 30 to 45 day window, something like that. 30 to 45 days from the submission of that final plat to when the approval deadline would be. So, that's a really long-winded way of saying it's in the later stages of the approval process, which began almost 3 years ago now.
So has the scope of the project changed significantly?
From the beginning, it's certainly changed. Certain aspects of the project have changed quite a bit in that three-year time frame. I wouldn't know whether what they submit as a final plat differs at all from what was preliminarily approved. Preliminarily approved in October.
I was glad to see that the apartment building is going to be renewable.
I will say, since I did make a public comment, excuse me, since I did make a public comment about it, after the preliminary approval was granted, I did reach out to Ithaca Neighborhood Housing on a couple of items to engage them on, again, the hot button issues that were on the slides behind me. They have expressed interest in the pilot program that I was wanting to investigate. Pilot stands for Payment in Lieu of Taxes. And so it requires Tompkins County to approve it. It's not as simple as just a written agreement. My thought being that if it were to take X number of years, and I know that I've heard everything from 3 to 8, regardless of how long it takes for the project to be fully built out, any property tax revenue would only start coming to the village after everything is complete. It's not phased in. And by way of example, if you build a house on a piece of land, you're only taxed, your assessment doesn't change until you receive a certificate of occupancy for your new house. So it could be a long time before all of the completed building receives a change to assessed value on which the village would get any revenue. So they have expressed, the developer has expressed a willingness to look at a payment cycle whereby the village can receive revenue sooner. What that means, we haven't, all I did was ask whether they'd be willing, and they said yes. We haven't gotten any further in what that might look like. You can imagine if you're the developer, you may want to have your number reduced somewhat from what the final assessment could be if you're going to start paying sooner. So that'll be kind of the back and forth, the negotiation side. But I wanted to know if they were even willing, and they were. The second piece I wanted to ask them about is, which may actually end up not being that relevant, because they will be applying for all kinds of grant money for all kinds of things to do with the project. If there was anything like stormwater management, where we could apply jointly, whether they would be willing to do that, and they said yes, but given how things have kind of shaken out with Assemblywoman Lifton's office and our need for kind of a comprehensive stormwater plan, I don't know how much collaboration will take place on that, but I was pleased to see that they would at least be willing to entertain the idea.
Just regard to that, the stormwater plan, and perhaps this is obvious to everybody, I just don't know it, but does the village cooperate with the town of Ulysses for stormwater plan?
We would if there was a comprehensive stormwater plan in place. So part of the development of that plan is how does, especially along the areas that border the town, how does that plan interface with the town? That's all part of it. We've only just received it, so we'll be talking about it at our February village board meeting a week from Monday. That's part of what the engineering firm put in their proposal is how to develop that plan and all of the kind of intricacies of how that interfaces with not only the town of Ulysses, we also border the town of Covert, we border another county, so there's a lot of potential collaboration on that kind of comprehensive plan.
When would they be covered for fire, et cetera, if they start building? How are we gonna pay for coverage of water?
Well, the Trumansburg Fire Department responds to any call for service within the Trumansburg Fire Protection District. So yes, if there was a fire on site, then we would respond. Another reason why trying to generate revenue sooner makes sense, rather than waiting an unknown number of years to begin taxing some unknown number.
And police will most likely be up in there checking it out.
Yeah.
While it's being built.
Yeah. All of the above. Yeah, Jerry.
On the stormwater management, I haven't heard anything in probably close to a year, but where are we with the actual study? Has the study areas changed? Because I know I've got a 20-year history of my neighborhood, including probably 7 or 8 neighbors. All the problems we've had, as well as all of our remediation efforts, and it's still an issue. So there's Bradley, Washington, East Seneca, and Strobridge on the radar.
Yes, so the study was finalized by MRB in late of 2018, so October, November. And that is the study we're using to target what I'm calling the hot spots. So the reason I didn't mention specific areas that we hope to cover from this grant is because I want to get the money in hand first. I don't want to promise an area is going to be taken care of and then have there not be the money for it. But all of the areas like your neighborhood that were identified as needing better stormwater management in MRB's study would be the obvious places that we would be looking to take care of first.
I don't know that we were in the original study.
You're in the one I looked at yesterday.
Are we? Okay, good. I just updated a brand new neighbor that moved in on the history, so she's aware of what's going on. So it's kind of fresh in my mind. If you need another packet of information or any other research that's been done, let me know.
Is this study available on your website or?
It will be when I get it digitally. We just saw the hard copy paper yesterday.
Is there consideration for this next budget year to increase the hours, paid hours for the zoning officers?
There was consideration in last year's budget to pay for the zoning officer who we have not been able to fill the position for some time. We are hoping to have the position filled soon, but I also said that last year. But no, the funding is there, it's in the budget, and it has been.
What is the current funding for that position? Hours, pay rate?
It's currently half-time, 20 hours a week. I would not recall off the top of my head the pay rate, 20.
Is it 20, Nikki?
20, it's about 20,000, it's about 20 hours a week at $20 an hour.
A lot of 20s.
Not
20.
20. You have to keep it easy.
Are there just not applicants?
Not very many. We've had a couple, but it's only part-time. Not nearly as many as you might think.
Right. Has any of the qualifications required for that position been prohibitive to some who might otherwise be qualified? So I just know for applying for jobs through the county or things, it's like, well, if you don't have 2 years of experience as a parking lot manager, then you can't be a parking lot manager.
We are looking for someone who has relevant zoning experience, given the nature of things going on in the village.
Speaking of that, I was talking to a business person, and across, I can't remember, be in front of, I go back to Campbell's, in front of Campbell's, inside park there. You put new signs up, and they were very upset because it looks like they can't have anybody park there for any length of time. And I was trying to figure out what the signs were, and I forgot what they were doing. Something about zoning, 15-minute parking, possibility, what was it?
So we,
So we recently had requests from some of the business owners for a loading zone on Main Street. There's been loading zones in our ordinance for quite a while. They weren't properly marked, they weren't actually very useful spots when we kind of took a look at them. So we recently revised that and added, moved around the zoning, the loading zones to more advantageous spots.
So how does it read?
It's 15-minute only parking. It's a double wide spot, so you could get a delivery truck in there. There's one on Main Street in front of the liquor store there and Hazelnut Kitchen. And there's one on the other end of Main Street towards the car wash in that area.
Yeah.
We have had some pushback from some of the owners there. That they would like that moved again, so we're looking at that again to move that probably in front of the Mason building.
So if you went in for a haircut, because this is who was talking.
yeah. So,
Different
so the 15-minute loading zone, there have always been at least two.
That's just
15-minute loading zone used to be in front of the Rongo. And then when the intelligent design of the Main Street project changed the shape of that area, and essentially the loading zone became that break field, it stopped being useful. So we are looking to move that one down closer to word of mouth. The loading zone up at the upper end always used to be in front of the village office. And the signs were removed, but the law wasn't changed, so we haven't had a proper loading zone. And if you've ever driven through in the middle of the day and that Cisco truck is double parked in front of Little Venice, it's a real safety issue. So what we're looking to do is we had amended the law to make a two-spot 15-minute loading zone in front of the liquor store and Hazelnut. We're actually now looking at moving that in front of the Masonic Temple, in between the driveway the Little Venice drivers come out of and the driveway on the other side of the Masonic Temple building. So that's actually 2.5 to 3 spots wide. So that would actually make a nice space for the tractor trailers to pull in and offload. It would help with visibility coming out of that driveway at Little Venice. And then it's also, Friday and Saturday nights are, and it's a good problem to have, are busy in the village. So if there are places for people to park for just a few minutes to run in, pick up their to-go order or whatnot, then that's something we want to help with.
Get back to the pizza run.
Yeah. So one thing I just want to add quickly is that parking is something that's difficult for us to deal with because we don't have good statistics. So we hear from business owners who would like a loading zone, we hear from various people, but if you have, I heard that it was difficult for some gem shop volunteers to park now. So if you have any of those stories, please share them with us because without doing a full traffic and parking study, we're shooting a little bit in the dark. So any information certainly would be helpful. I mean, we don't want to just keep moving it every other week, but it is a little bit in flux and we would definitely appreciate it.
Well, if a layperson came along and wanted to park, they took that space,
The police department has things to do.
so is he fine for parking in
Don't park there. Yeah. Yep. You definitely. I mean, if you're parked past the time limit that's allotted.
I can see where they might have.
Yeah, James.
Deb, I'd like to thank you for all your service, and I really learned a lot over the last 3 years from you, and I think I have a better understanding Thank you very much. And Keith, I'm glad that there was a study done there at the corner, you know, when all this original traffic study was done. It was reflective of all of what happens in that corner, and I sat out there in the woods for 2 or 3 days, counting cars, and I would like to see what the police study actually shows us. That was possible to see that.
I can ask, yeah.
Okay.
I didn't receive actually like hard numbers on
You did.
that intersection, but they might have them.
And then the last thing I wanted to say is that was not decaf in the orange thing, and I.
D what?
Decaf.
Oh, I don't know anything about
Well,
that.
I'm not casting any blame, I'm just telling you the result is, I'm gonna be for 2-3 days.
You're welcome.
No, I don't think so.
Oh,
I write letters, you know.
sorry,
Liz.
Sorry, Liz.
No, I'm not blaming you, it's
I've got 3 questions. I don't know if you want to hear any of them. But I'm going to say them anyway. When asking for determinations or interpretations coming out of the zoning office, not everybody has been successful in getting an answer, which I believe the zoning office itself, not specifically the officer, is part of the job is to, issue determinations. And is there any other way to find out if the zoning is compliant with actions or applications?
I would have to know more specifically. You could email me. I would have to know more specifically what it was that you requested that you didn't get an answer for in order to tell you whether or not that is that office's responsibility or not.
Okay, but in general, I believe that's part of the office issues determinations because they have for some people and not for others.
To make specific determinations of specific zoning questions, yes.
Okay. Now, several landlords have sold their property the last year. Some of them have smaller holdings, and I believe one of them, Mr. Ostick, has had quite a few. And do you think there's a reason that the landlords are, besides, getting old and moving to North Carolina, is there, some impetus for that to be happening?
I actually know specifically the reasons why they sold, but I would be violating confidentiality if I told you. As a federally licensed fiduciary, I cannot tell you why a client or potential client does certain things. So the answer is people sell properties for all kinds of reasons. And some people decide that it's time to retire. Some people sell or move for to be closer to loved ones. So without getting into the specifics of individual landlords and committing a crime by telling you what I know, there can be a lot of reasons why people sell.
I sort of want to add to that answer. I don't know any landlords in Trumansburg or who lived or anything, so I can't base it on anything anybody knows. What I do have is a number of friends that are landlords in Ithaca. And with all the changes regarding all of the laws that have changed about evictions and taking care of letting people in and they're all getting out of the business. None of them can fight the laws that protect the people that destroy their property. And so this is just anecdotal. It has nothing to do with what it's being seen here.
No, that is a good point, Deb. There was a significant legal change in 2019 that took effect in June or July with respect to tenants' rights. So I do know of some landlords who are taking that opportunity to offload properties. I will say that it is public record what these properties sell for, and they are going for top dollar. If that means anything.
I think, Brent, I mean, this is just an opinion, but generally when rental is sold, the rents tend to go up, making it kind of less affordable in general. And that's just a, consequence of being sold. But not that anything can be done about it, it's just an observation. Okay, here's my last question. At one of the meetings of the trustees, I was cautioned how to phrase a certain topic by the police commissioner, Mr. Hannon, and I felt somewhat intimidated by the person who's kind of looking after the police to warn me about how to say something at a public meeting. And once at a public hearing of the planning board, I was cut off from what I was saying because I was criticizing a public official, and I think that's a right and also a responsibility of citizens to do that. And when people are cut off, they tend to, either say, well, what's going on, or if you're intimidated, it gives you a sense that some government members don't want you to talk. And is there a policy about free speech that can be, generated to the people that are in charge?
Well, as you've noticed, Jack, I've never cut you off.
No, you're good.
How to phrase this gently. The First Amendment does not protect your right to speak at a meeting of a public body. It protects your right to speak on your own time. And so, New York State open meetings law is very clear that a public body does not have to allow public comment, ever, except in a public hearing, as required for the passage of certain items or certain laws. So within that context, and you can look it up, it's Public Officers Law, Article 6 or 7, Open Meetings Law. The body can promulgate its own rules in terms of when it allows public comment and how it will allow it. And there's been argument and there's been debate, and I know that Bob Freeman with NICOM leans towards the public can say whatever they want version, but the courts have not backed that up. And so if, I'll pick on the county legislature, if they want you to fill out question cards, they have the right to do that. Some public bodies, and I think I may have removed it, there used to be, it used to say that all remarks should be addressed to the board as a body and not to individual members. That is something that a board can choose to do or not. So, yeah, I added or the mayor. I don't mind people yelling at me. A lot of boards will say that you have to ask your question a certain way. You can only ask a question or speak for a certain period of time. They absolutely 100% have the right to do that. And that's really a preference of the board. It's a preference of the chief executive. My preference is to let people speak or ask.
I don't think that's right either. If somebody is speaking at a public hearing and not drifting away from the topic or not using profane or otherwise unruly speech, they're allowed to say what they want if it's on the topic. And I don't believe that the authority is given to any person to stop them from speaking.
I understand what you're saying, Jack, and I hear you, but the state of New York disagrees.
So just to be clear, we have guidelines for when you can talk and how you talk at each meeting. In the same way that if you walked into a court while court was in session, there are guidelines for how you present yourself and how you speak. Each meeting is governed the same way, and I think we do it, I think, to the best of our ability in a way that allows people to talk in a way that's fair and gives everyone a chance, and that's always our goal. But it is, I mean, as you know, who enforces, who decides if you're on topic, how all of those sort of gray areas get taken care of is always a little bit of a trick, but I just want to be clear, without knowing the specifics of what you're talking about, that our goal, I think, for this board and other boards is to encourage rather than discourage community input and conversation.
Well, I agree, and the board meeting that I was talking about with Mr. Hannon there, I was the only one there, and it was kind of a give and take between me and the board during the privilege of the floor. So I'm very encouraged that, you're willing to answer questions, and I was the only one there, so, I was kind of feeling that, well, and you did too, that it was okay to just kind of have a give and take, and I appreciate that.
Well, Jack, I'll add, I apologize if you felt intimidated. I am remembering this interaction, and I don't remember the exact details of the discussion. What I do remember was being very concerned about what was being presented and the, shall we say, suggestions or potential conclusions that you were suggesting about the topic. I think this was in a period where we had a lot of online discussion about a couple topics. There was a lot of conversation around kind of the ethical behavior of the board or employees within the village. And I recall being very concerned about kind of what was being said about some of these people and the suggestion that the government was acting in a way that was unsavory, and I felt like it bordered on hearsay even. So from my recollection, I was just trying to be very clear as a matter of public record, the danger that comes with kind of discussing those things publicly in a public meeting where people are watching and listening online, and then how that then carries over into public discourse, both in the streets and across social media. Again, I don't recall, I'd have to go back to the meeting tapes to remember exactly what we were discussing, but it's been one of the very few times as a board member that I felt the need to take a really strong stand on an issue like that, because I think what was being presented or suggested pretty easily, and at some points has, I think, in my 2 years here, kind of spiraled into very negative public conversation, and in a way that's often unfair to the people that are involved and don't often have a chance to defend themselves. So again, I apologize if that came across as intimidation. I do recall though that it was a very rare moment where I felt the need to give a very strong opinion on it.
Okay, well, it's just one thing to be cautioned about what you say, for the reason that it might stir up some, public discourse that was negative, because certainly some members of the board here have participated in forming groups that will be having that same effect as to stir up discourse that might not have a positive effect as far as solving problems. So I just felt that I should be allowed to say what I did without feeling that I had to be, cautioned that I was saying something that would be, incendiary.
Well, I think everyone should also remember that the people on this board have been elected in charge of representing the entire community. And we often have to speak for that community, if not defend that entire community. So while I think this board is very open to receiving any and all feedback, and I think we've actually greatly increased the opportunities in which the public can do that, I think we're well within our rights, if not very, it's important that we do so, also offer our opinions and feedback in moments like that.
Okay, but when you're on the board, it's different for sure that, you know, you have your opinions and feedback, but before you're on the board, you know, are you dismissing all the things that you were kind of cautioning me about?
This is a very difficult conversation.
Yeah, I think we,
That was specific.
yeah, I think we would have to go back and look at what, because I don't recall this interaction. But
April 2018.
we'll go to the tape.
I don't think I was participating, but I do want to take this as my soapbox moment. Because I'm leaving, and I finally get an opportunity to say exactly what I think. Okay. No one on this board knew that I was going to say anything, and actually, when I walked in, I don't think I realized I was going to say anything. But I do want to stress that we are all at service here. Understand that we have full-time other jobs, and that at $10,000 a year, you're getting more from Gordon, you're getting more time than probably his real job does. And I should be, I am honored to have worked with someone with his skill set that everyone sort of seems to dismiss. And it's not only Gordon, it is each and every person on this board. And as bad as Hamilton Square, well, whatever it's called, Crescent Way, the thing that was the most disturbing, and at one point I turned to my husband and I said, I want to move. I do not want to live here anymore with these people.
Well, many people out there said the same thing.
Except that I'm on the other side of the track. So my point is that we who are all here as service to you, we're having our integrity pummeled without fact in every media platform, and which is what I found so offensive. And I didn't answer 90% of it. I can understand people not wanting Crescent Way. I can understand, but I also know the need for affordable housing. I was very clear that I was for affordable housing from day one. But the stories that were made up in the media about how we were hiding things and weren't transparent. I had the opportunity to be at Falls having breakfast, and there were 4 elderly people sitting behind me while I was eating breakfast talking about this. And one couple says, well, you know that board, they're doing this, this, and this. Now that person didn't even know I was on the village board. I had never seen them before, and all of their information came from social media. I actually left my breakfast and left Falls. You have to understand that we are all people trying to do something for each of you. And I'm really sorry that everybody has left, because I would have said this to the whole group. So that's the end of my soapbox, but I do appreciate that you're at least here to listen and to learn.
I've never posted anything on social media.
It wasn't an attack on you, Jack. It wasn't an attack on any individual. It was an overall perception of the last couple of years.
Well,
Thank you.
I agree with you.
Thank you, Deb. It's amazing what you can get accomplished when you only sleep 4 hours a night. And if you've seen it on social media, it must be true. That's my take. Any other questions? There's way in the back.
I just have a question about if there's progress or any updates or anything on the bridge behind the post office.
Yeah, you know, I was going to say something about it earlier and it completely slipped my mind. So we have just in the last couple of days received information and filed application and some paperwork with the DEC. They've given, and thank you to Tammy for pulling all of that together this week. DEC has basically said that there's a certain procedure we need to do to get the permission to work in the stream. They did inform us that April is trout season, so we will not be in the stream in April. But it seems like...
Fish.
As long as you have your permit. So we'll be looking to take care of that hopefully this spring. We do still have to interface with the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure they don't have any flaming hoops of fire for us to jump through. And so I'm hoping, I hate to put timelines on things, but I'm hoping by late spring, early summer, we can have the bridge reopened.
Cool. Awesome. I'm just curious, when was it, any idea when it was built? I just wonder how long it was.
So originally Gregg
National
Street,
treasure
continued through where the post office is now and actually connected to Route 227. So it was kind of like a mini octopus. You had all these little roads feeding into 227 there. It was at one point a town, because the village isn't allowed to own bridges. It was originally an actual town bridge. So we've got to be going back to pre-automobile days when that road connected and that bridge was a real bridge for vehicle traffic of the day. It was when the post office was built that the town formalized the fact that they were deeding over the use of the now non-bridge bridge to the village for pedestrian traffic. And so we've been able to go back that far to find out the actual date and time that took place. I remember when it was rebuilt, been some time since the actual bridge itself was rebuilt. I remember a much earlier version, which was a lot more rickety. But the issue is not the bridge. The issue is the south side retaining wall, which is why we need some more repair.
I was there in 1977.
Yeah, at least that one. Yeah, Jerry.
I have two topics. One is on police and one's on comprehensive plan zoning review. But in general, I wanted to tell Keith that, and the board overall, that one of the things I appreciate about the work done on the police side committee work is that it seems to be very data driven. You gather information, you gather factual information, we make decisions based on that. And some of the other departments, I guess, may be less conducive to that. But I think it's important that we try to continue doing that in all of our departments. I really like the fact that the police are working closely with the school. I want to ask about which, for all of us, is really an unthinkable topic, and that's violence prevention, school bullying, teen suicide. What is the village police doing with the school, and community for that matter, to try to address it? A lot of people think that it's just, kids being kids, but I disagree. I think we need to be more proactive in a prevention mode. We've seen some disasters in the last couple of years. And I want to know how we're going to get serious about changing people's behavior when it comes to how students treat each other, how parents treat students, how teachers treat students, how administrators teach parents, how administrators treat teachers. I mean, it's all of us, and it's a concern of mine, and I think we need to have a serious discussion about it instead of taking the attitude that it can't happen here, because it can happen here. We're a wonderful small town. I just am concerned that something could happen. What are we doing?
So, first of all, I would say, as a parent of 3 young children, for our household, that stuff starts in the home, first and foremost. We all have a responsibility to talk to our kids about how we treat other people. And so I would offer that as just kind of from parent to parent. The school, you may remember that they put out the bowl up by the side of the street. Some people, was it a cow? Some people thought it was a cow. But the point was to identify a focus on bullying for the week. And so I know the police department was active in more than one occasion this year, greeting kids as they came in, handing out pens or pencils and other kind of school supplies that were branded for this type of awareness. So definitely taking it seriously on that front and working with the school district to have a presence and try to reinforce the bullying and any other kind of national awareness that you'll see trying to educate kids on drugs, etc. I think our police department's done a pretty good job being there. As I mentioned, they're a weekly participant in that leadership class. So on the mental health front, I think that's definitely an important topic. I think I'm always willing to talk to Chief Nelson about issues, and he's always willing to explore them. Understand bandwidth is always an issue. We are a small department. We typically have one person on duty at all times. Don't want to go into too much of our personnel because then potential criminals know when people are around. I don't see any in this room, but never know who's watching the live stream.
Oh, I said, we're all here.
Oh, right, yeah. So I would certainly say, if you have concerns, and I know the police department and the school district are in communication and any kind of emergency protocols that could arise. And again, that's why we have a car on the premises every morning. But in terms of the more detailed requests that you brought up, anything you want to share with me, I will take to Chief and get a more concrete answer on how we're addressing those things. If we're addressing those, how, what kind of jurisdiction we have to address those things, and all that.
Just jump in here quickly. So I think I'm grateful that Keith and certainly Chief Nelson have been to some degree proactive in this area, and especially in the school. But I think it's worth noting that the nature of police is reactive. Police come when you have committed a crime, they come and they find you. They can be proactive to some degree. Community policing especially is kind of built around that premise. But as far as proactive steps that we can take in the school to prevent mental health crises, violent issues, things like that, I think it's worth noting, first of all, that that's primarily the purview of the school itself. There's a reason their budget line, their tax dollars are the biggest one that you get. They have a lot of programs that I think do a really good job. But I also want to bring attention to something that I think sort of goes under the radar frequently, which is that the town and the village run together a youth commission that runs and funds program managers. Carissa was at one point a program manager. So we run jointly programs that operate in the school primarily, but also sort of around the school, and are focused on primarily targeting underserved youth, so youth who don't participate in sports or theater, any of those things. And bring them into the fold and create welcoming environments for them. In addition to that, there's the library programs in the library. There's programs all over town that I think are really, they're social programs, things that we usually think of. I think they tend to be portrayed kind of as fluff when you're looking at the budget. But the reality, in my mind at least, is that those are the proactive programs that bring communities together and prevent the need for reactive police service. So I would think, you have to think of all of these things as a comprehensive community building program. And to my mind, those things really deserve the primary attention in that conversation.
Then I'm not available when you guys meet, and I tried to keep track, and I've got meeting minutes, and I reviewed the 2008 plan. But I got just a general, I want to get a sense of kind of where you are with some things. So our comprehensive plan goes through 2028. We're a little bit more than halfway there. Just from my brief interaction with what the committee's doing, I guess I'm wondering, to what extent are we referring back to the 5 elements that we had in the original plan, the goals under those, versus trying to recreate the wheel in any way? Part of the problem, I'm wondering if you saw the same thing, if you reviewed our goals under each of the 5 elements. I think part of the problem is it's hard to determine. You mentioned we've accomplished a lot. There aren't a lot of measures in there that allow us to really have data that supports that. And I'm wondering if part of what you're planning going forward is going to be to try to make things more measurable so we can really know. And where are we in the context of the 20-year plan we've already got? Are we going to use that as the basis moving forward? Is this a review and a modification, or are we kind of starting from scratch?
Sure. I would say in general, this is kind of a start from scratch, but paying a lot of attention to what we already have. So we do, as I mentioned earlier, we have reviewed the entire, like all the goals, action items, strategies from the current existing comprehensive plan. We've gone through those as a committee to see which ones we think are mostly or wholly completed, which ones are possibly irrelevant anymore, which ones we want to continue forward. So we may not keep the overall structure of the organization, those 5 pieces or so forth, but we are being really cognizant of what we wanted to accomplish as a community and trying to bring those forward as we move forward. So that was one of your questions. And, wow, it's getting late in the afternoon.
That's fine. I guess maybe there's another way for me to contribute some thoughts. I've got some questions, I've got some concerns, I've got some suggestions,
please
just not able to participate.
No, please send me an email. I'd be happy to go back and forth over email, or we can find a time to sit down.
Okay.
I wish I felt like I had another train of thought to respond to you, but I lost your question, so I apologize.
That's all right. Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
How much, I know you're looking at the land to build either the fire station or the EM. Have you pursued any of the land that's almost available, if you could speak with a person, but you can't? Has there been any thought of getting in touch with him to buy property up the road or property line?
I am.
Well, the person we must not speak on.
Baltimore?
Baltimore.
Good luck.
That's about it.
Good luck with that.
I am looking into some potential options with respect to how we would start that sentence in a different place. If someone showed up with a giant check and said, "Here, build your new building," I am looking into, and it's mainly in the investigative and theoretical space right now, but I am looking into, well, where would we put it? Would we tear this building down and build a new one? Would we try to acquire property? Would we, I'm looking into how that might be able to be done. Unfortunately, and to something Deb mentioned, earlier, I am sensitive to the concerns that some raised prior to or when the 46 South Street proposal was submitted. I am sensitive to the erroneous impression that some people got that this was somehow a closet village project. Those people were wrong, but I'm sensitive to the fact that they got that impression. And so the reason why I've mentioned publicly that I'm looking into things is so that if someone shows up with a check and I announce, guess what? This is what we're building and where we're building it. That the people who dislike how I've done it will at least have been warned. Because I don't want any false impressions. I can't manage what other people think, and I'm not interested in trying to do that. But I am sensitive to how things can appear from time to time, given what we've just come through over the last 3 years. So that's really a long-winded way of saying, yes, I'm looking at options. And we will hope to find something that makes sense for the village, that won't cost the village taxpayer an arm and a leg to accomplish.
Can the new fire station have a fire pole? I think that sounds.
I think we all agree.
Yeah, you have to, 2 stories with a fire pole.
That sounds like a good question for the next chief.
I want to take 1 second to go back to Jerry's question, because I remember part of what I want to answer. You mentioned that the current comprehensive plan is very hard to measure or kind of understand how well we've accomplished, and I couldn't agree more. So that is actually something very specifically we've talked with EDR about. They intend to have a matrix as part of the new comprehensive plan, where we'll state out an action item, what goal that's aligned with, strategy it's aligned with, what group or groups may potentially address that specific action item, where those groups may go for funding potentially for that action item, and I think maybe like a time horizon of sorts, you know, kind of near term, middle term, so forth. So we are looking at that, and I couldn't agree more. It's very difficult to. I do think we've accomplished a lot, but I would say it's very open for interpretation potentially as well. And so we want to have something more concrete. I've struggled personally with the current comprehensive plan where it asks for all manner of things that don't necessarily fall under my idea of what this board's purview necessarily are. They're things that the village obviously wants and are valuable goals and action items, but is it the board's responsibility? And I don't have specifics off the top of my head, but I'd love it to see where we have those ideas. Building a community center, for instance. You could argue it's under the board purview. We could do that if that's what we wanted to do. We could look for something like that, but I'm not sure this is the right board for that. We have a community group, community directors looking at that. Maybe we're bringing them in the fold and saying, we'd love a community building. You know, here's a committee that's already, or a nonprofit entity that's already looking at it. Here's some grants they might go after, but now it's also in the village's comprehensive plan. They can use that for their own grant funding, but it's not necessarily on this board's plate. I think what's really helpful about that is it makes that really clear. Instead of it just kind of being, is the village going to do it? Does someone else have to step up? Where is this going to come from? So that is something we're definitely considering and looking at.
Well, I just encourage you to, because maybe the existing comp plan is a little bit flawed, to not want to be tempted to try to start from scratch because it's flawed. I think it provides a great framework to start with, and maybe we can just improve upon the measurability and some of the goals and things. And I would encourage.
Well, I agree. I mean, I hadn't dove real deeply into it until, you know, chairing this committee, and it's generally incredibly well done. I really, really do appreciate it. We have struggled a little bit with how do we incorporate parts of that with what EDR is proposing, which is a little more of a standard comprehensive plan that I think might be more accessible to outside entities who are trying to look at our comp plan and understand it. So I don't want to say that it's cookie cutter because that's not what we're trying to just rubber stamp something through, but it does help to follow kind of a standard mold for comprehensive plans so that it's accessible to outside agencies or outside other groups that might use it. So we're trying to figure out how do we kind of blend these things together.
Well, and I would just encourage all residents, they're all pretty much gone now, but to read that comprehensive plan and to read the existing zoning ordinance and to read the existing permitting process for that matter. It provides a context for a lot of these things, and that comp plan, you might say, oh, it's 180 pages or whatever. Most of that's data. There's a lot of information in there that you can quickly scan through and decipher and get a sense of what's in there. I think people need to be familiar with that plan.
Just real quick, is it still commonly held by the committee that the existing comprehensive plan was well executed for its time, that a lot of effort went in, that a lot of really good community involvement happened as a result of that plan, and it has been cited the good measures and the hard work that went into that as things that worked well as we look towards taking the temperature of where the community is now?
No, absolutely. I mean, everyone on the committee, as far as I'm aware, really thinks very highly of the current plan. And we want to obviously update all the statistics and kind of the data around it and take a new temperature of the community. A large part of the reason why we want to run another survey is because of the value that was gotten in the previous comprehensive plan for that process. And the intent, in large part, looking at that survey is to continue to bring forward many of the same questions. Maybe we'll tweak them. I think the order is being reworked. We're still in very early phases, but I'm personally interested, at least in couple chunks that I've seen in that survey that ask literally the same questions again and see where are we 10 years later, what's changed, and I think that can be really interesting information to bring in the process.
I want to thank the board.
Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for the diehards that stuck around to the bitter end.